Welcome, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. The Compensation Council is called to order. We have a quorum established, but we're going to begin by bring up that quorum by introducing ourselves and talking about ourselves. My name is Pat McCormick. I was chair last year. I'm a legislative appointee, and please tell everybody what kind of appointee you are. Last year we did all of the work, all of the Compensation Council, and I repeatedly told everybody that we no longer existed when we finished our final work, but the legislature determines things in their own way, and they re-established us in legislation and brought us here with a discrete set of new duties for this year. So I'm the first turn to our Vice David.
Sure. I'm David Asp. I'm an attorney. I like Richmond on now in Minneapolis. I'm a judicial appointee from the Chief Justice, and I have served on the council for at least 4 terms, I believe, times. And now, as the work is expanding, I was the vice chair last time.
I'm Roger Josephson. I'm from Detroit Lakes. There was a appointee of the governor's office. And was not at any of the meetings last year. I was on Zoom because I had broken my leg on scheduled skiing. So forth, but interested to be here. Retired educator. Schools. Interested in politics all my life.
I'm Jim Robbins. I'll just mention, because I'm soft spoken. I know these mics aren't great because I've checked the meetings that we had last year. So everyone should speak a little louder. Particularly Patrick, you were relatively soft spoken. I was appointed by the court in 17 and 19. Not on the court. We convened a ad hoc group in 23. Some legislation changed. Former Senator Dick Cohen is no longer allowed to be on the council, so I thought I'd rejoin the new Chief Justice wanted me, and so I'm again a court appointee 3 times now, and I believe you've been on, David, if I recall correctly, each time since 17.
I'm Tom Boyd. I live in St. Paul. I practice in Minneapolis. I've been on the council for 1 year, and I was appointed by the governor.
I'm Tim Stout. I'm from Montevideo. I am the chief of staff to the county sheriff, and I was appointed by the speaker. I'm Upper Duckby. I run a small software company. This is my third.
I'm Amanda Mills. I live in St. Paul and I'm an attorney at Frederickson and Byron in Minneapolis. I was a legislative appointee by Aaron Murphy. That's been 1 year.
Hello, I'm Devin Driscoll. I am also an attorney at Frederickson and Byron. I live in Minneapolis, and I'm an appointee of the Chief Justice.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carl Morton Badger. I'm a legislative appointee from Speaker Damon. I'm an attorney at Best and Flanagan in Minneapolis, and before that, I was a legislative staffer for 5.5 years. And it's my first Compensation Council meeting ever, so it's good to meet you all.
My name is Susan Holden. I'm an attorney. I practice at Sieben Carey in Minneapolis. I was a judicial appointee. I've been appointed by the last 2 Chief Justices, so it's been an appointment.
My name's Amanda Matchett. I'm the Vice President of Legal for Energy as a software company out of Sauk Rapids. I live in Blaine. This is, I want to say, my 4th or 5th appointment by the governor to the Compensation Council.
We have a number of members who are here remotely on Zoom. So why don't we start with Gary?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Gary Borgendale. I live in Ramsey. I lead a ministry called Kingdom Alignment of Minnesota, very much of it apostolic. And also I facilitate the Mayor's Christian Fellowship. We have about 30 mayors. We meet weekly over Zoom. And I'm appointed by Chief Justice Barry Anderson, or recommended through Chief Justice Barry Anderson. And this is my second year on the council.
Thank you. Janice?
Hello, I am Janice Brandt. I live in Brooklyn Center. I'm the Assistant Finance Director for the City of Coon Rapids, and I was appointed by the governor, and this is my second year.
Thank you. Tim?
Tim Brinkman, I live in Erskine, Minnesota. I'm CEO for Garden Valley Technologies. I was appointed by Mark Johnson, and this is also my second year.
Thank you. Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Commerce, and this is my second year, and I was appointed by the Senate Republican Caucus.
Nick?
Hi, my name is Nick Morgan. I'm an attorney over at Hush Blackwell, and I think this is my third or fourth year, and I was appointed by the Chief Justice.
Not sure, do we have Christy here? Okay. Thank you everybody for the introductions. We'll have at least one new member appointed for the July meeting that's underway. Staff, could you introduce yourself? Start with Nick.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nick Nero. I work with the LCC, the Legislative Coordinating Commission. I'm a research analyst and an attorney, so I'm here to help. If you have any data requests, reach out to me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Olson. I'm a commission administrator with the Legislative Coordinating Commission and here to help provide staff support to this group.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Urick. I'm the executive director of Legislative Coordinating.
Austin Turman, another research analyst with LCC.
Fine. We're going to begin with review of the open meeting law, Data Practices Act, data practice policies, and our duties with regard to ex-parte communications. So I'm going to turn the table over to you.
All right, so I included a handout in your packets, and it's also online for the folks on Zoom. And I just tried to do in plain language 3 important policies or law areas you should be aware of. The first is data practices. The Compensation Council is covered by the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, which means that all of our meeting materials, conversations here are public data. And so we could theoretically get a data request for anything we do here. If we do get a data request, we'll obviously let you guys know. I don't know if that's ever really happened, but just be aware that any communications around this work is public data. Second, the ex parte rule. For everyone's clarity, I put the full rule in the handout, and this has changed over the years. But the gist of it is that you should not speak with judges, agency heads, constitutional officers about the work of the Compensation Council. Of course, many of you are attorneys. You're going to be communicating with judges. We understand that that is okay. As long as you're not discussing with them what their salary should be, we're in the clear. And then last is the open meeting law, which also applies to the Compensation Council. And so under that law, anytime a quorum of members are discussing the materials or the issues before this council, that legally is a meeting. It doesn't matter if you take action, just if all of you met in the cafeteria in an hour and discussed, that would legally be a meeting. So we advise avoiding any large groups, avoiding any emails where everyone is CC'd, and really keeping conversations to minimal groups so as to avoid
violating that law. I'm happy to answer any questions about these three, or provide you with the full statutes if you're interested.
Questions, Jim?
Nick, I just want to reiterate what we were communicating on earlier, that your interpretation that as long as we aren't discussing salaries, communications, the folks that we cover are okay if you just run into them or there's a meeting you know they're going to be at. As long as you're not discussing salaries, that's your understanding of how we should operate under.
Yes, if you run into each other at the grocery store, it's totally fine. Even if the two of you discuss it, it's fine. If all of you went to the same birthday party, it would be fine. It really becomes an issue once you then start discussing this. So to avoid that, if you're all invited to a birthday party, we'll discuss it, but otherwise, I don't think this should be an issue.
It's just interesting because yesterday I got the summons from Ramsey County. I was hoping Judge Kyle would be here and I could mention that. And it was for before September 1, and I'm over 70. I just kind of decided I won't bother with jury duty, but you know, it's that kind of thing that comes up.
Questions, anybody? If you're online, speak up if you have a question at any time, because we'll track you down and make sure you get your moment. All right. First new duty is with regard to setting the salary for the office of the Inspector General. So we're going to start with a overview of what that office does, why it came to this group, and what our duties are. And then we're going to take some testimony from MMB on this very topic and see what they have to say. So Nick is going to give us just a general rundown of the background.
Yeah, so you'll have a number of materials in your packets and online. The first is a memo from the Senate Council Research and Fiscal Analysis that broadly goes over compensation council duties. And specifically that in the last session, the legislature created the office of the Inspector General, and it gave the Compensation Council the power to set the initial salary. Of course, the Compensation Council will be reconvened again next year, so it could, you all, assuming you're reappointed, could change the salary again next year, but this would be that initial salary up until that point. And then I also put together a couple documents, taking some excerpts from this new statute, with pieces that pertain to the OIG themselves, including what are their law enforcement powers, what resources do they have. The statute sets out minimum qualifications for the position, and their authorized powers and responsibilities. And then at the request of the chair, I also included the votes and the governor's signature page as additional information. And lastly, for everyone's ease of reference, the spreadsheet with the list of agency heads has all of the agency heads' salaries that you approved in your last meeting, so you have points of reference to compare the OIG to. Happy, of course, to answer questions about any of these. And additionally, if there are data points that I haven't included that you would like to see, you can let me know in the meeting or after, and I'm happy to compile those as well.
Questions? Be online with questions. Okay, I asked that the vote totals on the governor's signature page be included because I think it's good to know that this is well reported law signed by the governor. It creates this office and gives the duties to this particular body. And so we have the provenance for what we're doing here It's a highly controversial topic. You probably, if you follow the papers in the legislative session, you probably tracked it the last couple of years. And now it's come to our table. We have to make this decision as we do all the other decisions prior to September 1. So we're gonna take information today, and broadly speaking, my plan here is we take information today. There are some people who cannot testify today and who will be testifying in July, so we'll take more testimony in July. And then we will come in August for a final resolution of all the matters before that. So timing of asking Nick for more data is really important if you have questions or you want more data, to get that to Nick well in advance of the July meeting, because I would like the July meeting to have as much as possible on the table to think and ponder and work through. And then as we get up toward August, any last minute bits of information that you want, we'll cover it for the group. And so, and we have Gary has your hand up, so go ahead, Gary.
Yes, this is more of an information request that may be coming down the line, but it would be to seek out from other comparable size states if there's this position within those states and what that compensation is from that standpoint, just as a research basis as Nick goes forward. So it's not, and if it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist, but to put that on the table now for appropriate research as needed. Thank you.
Good. Other questions or thoughts? So we're going to stick with the OIG before we get to the judicial appointments. And so our next testifier is from Minnesota Management and Budget, Dory Leland, and she's going to provide both an overview of the position and answer any questions you may have. And get Dory set up. Package have this document outlining the testimony, get a review. Direct one to the Compensation Council and take it away.
Afternoon. My name is Dory Leland. I'm the Director for Workforce Development at Minnesota Management and Budget. In that capacity, I oversee enterprise classification and compensation. You probably already are aware of all of these things as part of your materials, but just some part of the primary duties of this position have been identified. They're to serve as an independent entity on the executive branch, responsible for ensuring accountability, transparency, and integrity of the operations of executive branch agencies and programs. We don't need to read the rest of the text of the slide here, but these are the primary duties. It's a little unusual in this case that they actually put some pretty specific minimum qualifications into statute. So anybody to be considered for this position must meet each of these criteria. Bachelor's degree in one of several identified fields or something related, 10 years of experience, auditing, investigation, or related area, requires professional certification. And in addition to being able to provide leadership to the existing inspector general offices, there's also some restrictions about who may not be considered for this position. And so there are some, there will be some narrowing of the potential pool just because of the very specific minimum qualifications that were put in statute for this position. For your consideration, as you're making decisions about salaries, I'm going to quickly address three potential bases for you to consider. It's obviously your decision, but MMB has three different things for you to think about. The third of which does actually include the salary of similar positions in other states. So to the extent looking for that data, maybe already has it, we'd be happy to provide what we've been able to collect from our ad hoc survey of inspector generals in other states. We've also done some analysis of similarities and differences for your consideration, as some of them do play parts of this role, some of them have a role that's bigger, but we can provide, I'd be happy to provide all of that data. First approach. you could consider paying this position in a similar way to the way all of the other commissioners in state executive branch are paid. As you recall, because I've spoken to many of you before, there's kind of 3 tiers for the commissioners at the largest agencies. According to what we know about the size of this agency and the responsibilities that is most similar to an agency head that would be paid at the 189,026 band. These are the July 1 rates that you all approved, and so this is what the salary for the position would be. My understanding is that they're hoping to have someone in this role by February, so this would be the starting salary if that's what you second, yes.
About approach one is the comparison based solely on the size of the town, or are there other factors?
That's a good question. The answer is it's based on a number of factors. We don't know exactly the size, like the number of people in the agency. We don't know the budget. We know generally what the scope of responsibilities are. We have some idea of what the positions are. And in addition, at least my understanding of the statute, and Nick or anyone else can correct me, they have contemplated at some point adding a law enforcement wing, but that is not a part of the office at this particular time. And so if the next legislature decides to add that law enforcement wing, it may change the total responsibility of the office, but based on what we knew about scope of responsibility, anticipated size of the agency, and also the budget, that's where we our best professional assessment of which tier would like to go.
There's one, I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
With regard to all 3 approaches, did any or all of them take into account the credentials, the minimum credentials that are required for this particular post, which, as you said, seems to be somewhat unique?
I think that the second approach I'm going to talk about in a minute gets the closest to factoring that in an explicit way. Second would be to look at hate points. We did have this one evaluated by a team of people who have been trained in hate job evaluation methodology. The point value that was assessed of 2056, which doesn't mean a lot to out of context, but that point value is assessed with a salary range that would be at 198,214. So higher than the tiering structure that we have for commissioners. If we were to use it based on hate points, which look at things like the knowledge and skills that are required for the position, the accountability, the scope of the problems that it needs to solve. This is the salary that those hate points would suggest. The third approach would be to do a purely market approach. We have some data, we have some comparison states in here for you to take a look at, and the average pay for that actually ends up being pretty close to where the hate points would put it at 199, 130. There are some pros and cons to each approach. On the one hand, it's nice to have some consistency under approach 1 with how they treated all the other commissioners. On the other hand, you may be aware MNB doesn't love the existing tiering approach, and so maybe this would be an opportunity this could be the start of a new era in terms of how we look at compensation for those. It would also result in kind of the lowest of the tiers if we were to follow the existing tier structure of this position. The second approach is consistent with how we approach salary for the remainder of the executive branch, and so that's something that is favorable. But that would place it in a different bucket of considerations than all the other existing agency heads. And then to consider it based on market, that would lead to the highest salary, but it also is inconsistent with how we decided salary for basically any other position within the executive branch. So that would be something unique and specific, only decided for this particular position. MNB's recommended approach is number 2. You're obviously free to make your own decision, but we think this approach is closest to reflecting at least what we know at this time about what the complexities are of this office.
Question.
Sure.
So I first understand the level of power and responsibility you have here. So when we make our recommendation, what happens between that date and hiring this person? Who is doing the hiring? What is the process?
So the Department of Administration is responsible for the hiring process. And I'm not familiar with the entire process, but I know there's a committee that's being formed that's going to be considering applications. Michelle can probably speak to this because she's nodding and is going to be involved in that particular process. The goal is to have somebody in place by February, and whatever salary you decide will be the salary that's used to promote that position that the individual will be paid for when they start.
So I had that similar question, but then so we, maybe, I'm, a little late, we make our recommendation are we truly set? We're just making the recommendation or we're setting it? And then the committee that's formed will take that as like what they advertised out for?
This committee determines the salary.
Okay.
We will set the salary, and then advisory committee will make recommendations for appointment. As I understand it, the advisory committee is made of legislators, and the recommendations could be a candidate or a panel of candidates. And then the governor can decide to accept one of those recommended candidates or go elsewhere and pick a different candidate in the context of the requirements in law. So I'm sort of Devin and I'm with Jeff.
And this may be a question for Mr. Nero, but also that person, once selected by the governor, has to be confirmed by both houses of legislature, correct?
I believe they just have to be confirmed by the Senate, and I think it's a 2/3 majority in the Senate.
Yeah, to be removed from the position as a 5-year appointment, to be removed, the governor needs agreement of both.
Sure. Thank you.
So 2/3 majority to ratify the position and then to remove majority of both bodies. Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it seems extremely likely that the next governor will be making the selection. It's just timing with the after the elections. And I do have a series of questions. If you didn't see them from this morning, I just like to touch base on. When you're.
I think I'm mostly done. This is just kind of a summary of the basis for MNB's recommendation, but happy to take any questions on Mr. Robbins or anyone else.
Okay, we're gonna open for questions.
So you did answer my first question, which is that this initial setting is not including the enforcement portion. Actually, in the legislation, at this thing, the enforcement mechanism sets out at the beginning of 2028. And so it gives the governor and legislature time to decide what really was the hangup in getting this approved from one year to the next. And that is, it's controversial as to whether the enforcement mechanism should stay with BCA or not. So the next compensation council next year will have a much better idea, given that there'll be a new administration, a new legislature, and they will have that time. So I think it is appropriate that we set this based on certainly allowing them the idea of planning for the enforcement if it comes their way, but the actual duty is not with the enforcement mechanism. My question is, do you have a sense of how much higher this would be if the enforcement mechanism is instituted as the legislation indicates now?
Without knowing the full scope of that, I couldn't answer specifically. However, in the tiering of commissioners, the Commissioner of Public Safety, which is we have a couple agencies, but the largest and the one where the BCA sits now is in that highest tier of commissioners. So.
Clarification is statute. The statute is 15E.27 subdivision 1 states that beginning January 1, 2028, the Inspector General may appoint peace officers as defined and establish a law enforcement agency as defined. And it goes on to state the name of that and the authority to conduct statewide investigations and make statewide arrests. So that's a current statute. Any of the positions we set SARs for, any of the positions that are brought here are subject to further legislation. And by the way, all of us are promised going away this year. And all the appointing authorities will be new. Chief Justice, new governor, legislative leaders. It could be some of the same legislative leaders, but they're new, having survived an election. So yeah, the new compensation council will have to look at how these powers are used, but there is some permissive authority currently in the statute.
At least, so my assessment didn't include that because my understanding of the current budget doesn't incorporate that piece of it, but it would increase the points and probably increase my recommendation once that is more formal. Yes.
Turn to Amanda.
Yeah, so kind of on that same track. So you said that this person will be appointed for 5 years. Is this budget static for that 5 years? If, as we're setting the salary, then does that include like, you know, CPI increases each year? Would we need to consider that, or is this a set thing for each 5 years or the term? You know, just curious about how that setup is, because I think that impacts potentially the budget as well too.
Can't speak to how the budget of the agency might change under current legislators, but the way it has been for agency heads is that their salary is absolutely the same and does not incorporate. Well, this committee last year had a 3.7% increase. So future salary increases for this position will be decided by
each. Yeah.
One of the things we would be considering next year would be for the period of the next compensation council, should we do inflationary adjustments to these salaries? Should we do other kinds of adjustments to these salaries? So it's all be on the table. And if this group decided not to make changes, then the salary would stay locked in as is.
I think to just clearly answer what you're asking, I believe the position would be treated as all of them are. You'd be making the salary decision for the next biennium, so those 2 years. And theoretically, we can go further because we're allowed to, but the legislature ultimately decides salaries. So we would probably only do it for the 2 year. I did have just one more question, and that is, and maybe asking you to talk a little too broadly, but the comparatives, there are salaries within the departments of Inspector General, and then there is the Medicare Fraud Unit Director under the Attorney General, and that person answers directly to the Attorney General, and that unit has been expanded by, I think, 18 positions, so considerably going from 30 to 50. So it appears to be a larger unit than the initial new office of Inspector General. And in your testimony, as you noted, the legislative auditor is the established entity. It is the largest of the 3 entities, clearly. And I just wanted you to say, you know, if you want to talk about those sort of salaries that are sort of comparative, again, the director, unit director in the Attorney General's office, and then I think there are 2 Inspector Generals in DHS and in the children, youth and families.
Oh, I'm not sure I'm clear on exactly what your question is. I mean, the salary of the Attorney General office is up to me, it's up to you guys. And the positions in their office, they largely have established their own salaries for that. The intended scope of this office is, I think that something that remains a little bit to be seen, only because there are these other independent, well, they'll have a kind of a reporting relationship to this, but DHS is keeping its own Inspector General office and all 50 some odd people that are in it. Other, DCYF is keeping its own Inspector General office within its own agency. So Other types of inspector general positions will go to this office, but as far as I know, the OLA is keeping all of their inspectors within their office. But for purposes of comparison, my comparisons for those agency heads, the highest level position.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I've been emailing the Attorney General's office. I've made my way to their HR person. I'm trying to figure out the Medicare fraud unit director's salary. So once I have that, I would have that for the next meeting, hopefully.
Yes, one question for you on data points. One of the minimum qualifications is professional certification from the Association of Inspector Generals. Does that association have salary survey information would be helpful to inform us in this process?
I'll look into that and I'll let you know if we will.
Are there questions from the folks who are on Zoom? There, other questions from the group about the Inspector General position? I appreciate the work from MMB. I have the other questions from while you're here. Or other topics, but Brian, I also appreciate the recommendation from MMB. It's really useful to have a starting point with us. So thank you on behalf of the Compensation Council for that. I know there's some curiosity, so I'll throw a curveball about the next Compensation Council, which may not include anybody in this room. It might not even include you. You might have other duties. But run through how, first of all, Nick, could you run through when this group will be reconstituted, and then maybe we could have discussion from MMB about what data you're going to be providing to that new group. I just spent 5 minutes looking over the hill to see what the next Compensation Council will be doing. So, I'll start with you, Nick.
Yeah, so I'm just checking the statute to make sure I have the dates correctly. So the Compensation Council will be reconvened next spring. One of my colleagues can correct me, but I believe appointments are due January 1st or January 15th. We're hearing January 15th, and your recommendations are due April 1st. So oh, I'm looking at the old statute. That's on me. May 1st, so you'll have a couple of months until May 1st to make those determinations and recommendations. And that council next year will just be determining agency heads and constitutional officers. So it'll be agency heads and constitutional officers in the odd numbered years, and then judicial salaries in even numbered years.
The Compensation Council then persists for 2 years and make those both the 27 and 28 recommendations. I think that's at least my understanding, is that.
Yeah, so the determinations that the Compensation Council will make for May 1st of next year will go into effect July 1st of 2027 and July 1st of 2028.
So for MMB, it's a very short truncated period of time for the next council. So when will your data collection activities start? And if people on this council want to start asking for things, even though acknowledging they may not be here next year. So when the MMB start kicking in? Because it's likely that this is going to be something where early February of 2027, we're going to need to start having a new Compensation Council meeting.
We can start collecting and providing data at any time. The data that we have provided historically includes market data for other positions in the public sector kind of sphere that we're likely recruiting from these positions. Turnover data to the extent that we have any, although it's pretty minimal these positions. Hit point data at this point is pretty old. It would be an investment for us to have new pay evaluations done, but it's something we're considering. If it would be of use to a future Compensation Council, it's not been the basis for any of the compensation council decisions to date, but if it would be of interest to a future compensation council, that's an investment we'd be willing to make. We also pull comparator state data for similar positions in other states for folks to evaluate, you know, what the equivalent of the Commissioner of Human Services is in our kind of other state environment.
One more, and then throughout 27, you'll be putting together the judicial data for the 2028 compensation council.
I've not historically put together the
You'll
judicial.
be getting thoughts on other groups. It's not your duty, and some of those folks are gonna be testifying in about 5 minutes.
Just texting, I believe, I'm recollecting that it was 2015 the last time there was a Hay study completed, is that correct?
That's more or less correct. There was a large statewide manager level study that took place between 2015. And Hay points don't tend to change a lot over time because the responsibility of the office stays pretty similar, but there are some agencies that have been under a lot of change, right? DHS is an entirely different entity than it was in 2015. There are new agencies that didn't exist at that time, so.
Other questions? Go ahead, Tom.
Just to refresh my memory, the last set of meetings was the first time I'd ever heard of a evaluation or review. And my recollection, I never completely understood it, but my recollection is that it's considered best practice and it's important information to have. What's the standard in terms of updating this? You mentioned that if the position doesn't change much, you don't need to update it, but what's the recommended practice?
The recommended practice is whenever there's been substantial changes to the position, but I think for this purpose, there have been enough changes locally that we would probably have them all evaluated. And they would be evaluated based on whatever our most current up-to-date position description would be, but it would include things like agency size, agency budget, scope of responsibility, enforcement responsibilities, all of those different factors.
Do you have a sense of what that would cost for heading into a deficit period as stated in? I think every few million count, but do you have a sense of what it would cost?
We do have people trained in the Hay methodology that work with the state. For a project like this, if we wanted to outsource it to the kind of sole source vendor for this, it's about $1,000 per position. So not an enormous investment, but not peanuts either. So we would have to decide how much of it we could do internally versus having it outsourced.
Micromanage, but if you were to try to do it in-house, would that be manageable? Would it be a manageable objective to get that done by early next year?
Well, to be totally candid, the most challenging part would be who the best person would be to update the position descriptions, because they're appointed by the governor, so really it should be the governor to update all of those. I doubt that Governor Walsh would have the capacity of people in his office to do that, and so it would be a matter of being sure that the agencies themselves were comfortable with how we had described that piece of it. But we do have, I think that finding the staff and the time to do it, if we hadn't something we were to do, would be manageable internally. There may be some value in, of course, additional legitimacy if it was done by people outside of the executive branch potentially, but we had to do it in-house. We have enough time.
The other thing is that we may lack the ability to, we do lack the ability to demand that you do it, but I think it's a very good conversation to have. Is it possible you could, go back to maybe talk to some folks and flesh out what it would look like if that's something to be asked for? Come back and maybe in the July hearing and kind of spend 5 minutes talking through. Because anything we can do to defend the progress of the next council to get them the data that they might wish quickly on their appointment would be a good thing. Personally, I think a Hay study across the board would be timely and useful. A lot of the discussion today has centered, or you have mentioned, at least in this meeting, that there are other ways of setting the salaries for the state agency heads that MMU would like to have considered. And I don't wanna take endless time, but if we had 10 or 15 minutes on the calendar at either the July or the August meeting, whenever you're ready, just to look forward to the next group, talk about these issues and see if we can kickstart the conversation so that in January, legislature says, they often don't go to the compensation council as the #1 appointment that they make. This is a wonderful and a highly valued group, and I especially love them. But if we had to rank order all the speaker or majority leader appointments, we might be somewhat middling on that list. And so sometimes it's February and the group can convene. And there are things that we would, or they would like to do in February that it may already be too late. And I just kind of hate that dynamic. So I'm gonna invite you back at either July or August and really take your time, whichever. Let us know, let Nick know which one fits your schedule better. And anybody who has thoughts or concerns about things we can tee up for both the 2027 and 2028 recommendations, I think it would be good to put those on the table for MMB and for other of the folks who handle some of the judicial matters. Just to kind of create the continuity of data and the continuity of discussion that could help. But thank you for your testimony. We're gonna, is everybody good to keep going? Yes. Good, we don't need a break. Next on our agenda is a presentation by the Minnesota District Judges Association. And we have Dr. King Banyan here. And I'm not sure if we have Judge Richard Kyle. Why don't we take about 10 minutes? Okay, we're gonna reconvene in 10 minutes. It's now 1:45, so we're gonna try to come back together at about 5 minutes to 10 and reconvene. So the Constitution Council is in recess.
So he's just actually, he'll be here. No, Dr. Bain is there first. Yeah. I appreciate the efficiency. And as someone who watched the budget.
Hello. How are you? Good, how are you?
He is with. Yeah. Thank you. Amanda, I had to come back because it's hard.
So, Brandy Johnson,
Oh,
a good friend of mine. And then one of my all-time favorite law students I've been teaching, the last one, Jerry, he just was my favorite job. Yeah, sure. Yes, or her. Yeah, like I said, she's literally studying for the bar right now, just graduated. I'm not supposed to have favorites, but she is mine, so
I certainly understand Brian.
yeah, well, Brandy's just a good friend. Yes, that's what she's.
Fusion, okay.
And I should have done it before. Of course, she was.
Schedule this stuff.
Didn't need me, but you know, she's interviewing.
Other than the-
Interviewing out, of course. So,
Well, let's.
yeah, definitely.
You know, my father's a lawyer in summer. I thought, oh, I just be this for all these travel, but it wasn't our time.
Well, yes.
This summer, we're just staying clear, going. We've got a big trip.
Yeah. Went to Iowa State. Lived here, went to Washington, Michigan State, and then lived here.
Tent camping or camp?
Yeah,
Well,
I,
we are not.
born and raised in Iowa, I know.
Good.
I would, but, my wife is.
I was really. You know,
I
like,
did enough of that. I'll do a camper cabin, but that's.
nice.
Yeah, I think it is.
But
I am excited about.
now we're like, this is.
Sources.
Well, and actually, my dad, you and I, my mom, Cedar Falls, so I'm the one.
I think it's the easy one.
Buckle trim.
It's so fair. That's exactly. People do it.
That's a lot, yeah.
I joined the flooding up there about many years ago.
No, thank you.
It's 29 miles. Specialized.
3 days, something nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's what.
Well, so it's funny because I've been talking to Randy, so he just started his first PhD job in February. So, it's all energy, yeah. So.
And I bet now, leadership of some, summer next year.
Right.
Yeah. This, non.
So there are.
Yeah.
But it's. I would work here.
Yeah, we do.
All of that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Last summer.
All your help.
Oh, that's.
Yeah, that's, I don't have any experience in the industry. I got rid of those, like, you can finish overview.
Yeah, and then you can just hit the air out. The air or the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, bringing everything forward, some of them are awesome. And everyone hates it, but it's, there's no getting.
That's the law school. That's the law school, so,
Structure.
yeah, I was just meeting with.
I actually got.
Well, I mean, and that was like our spring break. But it was, yeah, like it was nice the last couple of years.
We have a daughter.
Are you over at the agency right now? Yeah. Yeah, I was at.
Yeah, I am now, you know, now it's like a second home, you know, having come on there.
And spring break, we're doing about 3 years.
You know. You got it, you got it. Getting married in 2 weeks.
I don't know.
It's good to be here too, so.
Nice.
I like.
Leadership is a place to be. Beautiful, easy.
Oh, yeah.
I know. Good sunny year round.
I feel like University of Iowa. I should talk to, but.
Really.
Good to see you.
Used to be
Really. She had a. No, she had a. It would have caught her.
Yeah. Well, and the Twin Cities suck, you know. I moved here on a day after law school and 2 years later. Still
You're
keep,
gonna
you know.
prize
So I get it. Weird. Yeah. Sorry. We've been on the council before.
Right.
Yeah. I missed the last one. And a heart, and then, yeah, and there's.
Where to be.
I am right now, so. I know. Trying to do not be married and running over your house all in like a summer.
You went to Ireland and I.
Yeah, we.
Yeah, I signed up to be a director, and then it's like.
Okay, well, you should have
that right
So
now.
that's good.
I don't find out.
That's great. I'm part of this.
We're gonna share an anniversary.
The idea that
The United States, but I don't, you know, there's like lots of fun things we're proud of.
I will
And or like, even joking, like my fiance's is free as America, you know, like there's lots of different, mostly I just want to buy like.
We're taking a big.
I just figured in Blaine, that's where I live, at the.
Well, sure.
Yeah. PGA tournament is coming like in like 2 more weeks, so it looks like all the same. Yeah, it's great, so we are, you know,
There are things like.
it's very pretty,
I was on my-
very, fun. We're like, we're having a 4th of July party.
We're not gonna know that yet. So that's the.
So that doesn't feel like a heavy lift, but it's still,
Right, you don't know. Right, I don't have any lawyers. You're in the summer.
Understanding to get there.
wear your red, white. Be chill with it.
Eventually, it will be interesting too.
I'm quite I don't enjoy what we have, so I want to, I go down
One of
to,
our best.
I'm a house. Yes, that's right, like, there's no express. Lots of things that go.
Yeah, but like.
About it, so it's.
He's incredible.
Oh, that's great.
We're not getting to the whole thing for.
He had two.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes, or how I can fit their associates. Because of how he has looked at things that way, I never did.
I would say it is, you know, like.
Arrived in my box. You know, we've had a.
Talk like how do you really are.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
I don't wanna make it the book thing. I don't have any good alternatives. Otherwise, no, like the plan is still not everything.
Yeah. But the thing you're amazing.
I got you now.
I work with. I put it there. I know you're next. I'm working the search. Yeah. 5 years ago. I'm so glad I agree. About 2 years ago. I was all our best inspections.
Thanks for help.
I'm gonna bring this room back to order. I'll get a moment to get settled in. Thank you for your patience. Thank you online people for your patience. We're switching gears a little bit to usual decisions that this group has to make. And so we're going to begin by hearing testimony from the Minnesota District Judges Association. We have Judge Richard Kyle and Dr. King Canyon. So in whatever order you gentlemen would like to testify.
Thank you, members of the council and for the time today. My name is King Banyan. I'm a professor of economics at St. Cloud State University. The report that we provided to the MDJA is a report co-authored with one of our graduate students in applied economics, just graduated last month, Benedict Dimuka. She also served as a research assistant to my Center for Policy Research and Community Engagement. We do research on behalf of our community. We work for many places without charge as a public service that St. Cloud State provides to folks. MDJA reached out to us a couple of years ago in succession of other universities which had prepared studies for them in the past. We're proud to have been selected to do the study this time and glad to be back a second time around. I will note that you have a report from co-authored by me and Ms. Dimica. You also have a second report that I'll refer to just from her. This was her culminating project for her master's degree. Our students go out and take internships, and at the end of their internship, they provide us with a report. That report is reviewed by a group of faculty, both within the economics program and outside. She worked with a psychologist in developing the survey that I'll describe today. The other thing I'll note before I finish clearing my throat here is that this report is preliminary because we are still awaiting data on the number of applications received by the Judicial Selection Board over the last 2 years. That is still incoming. That request was made a couple of weeks ago. We did not receive in time to put it into this report. So we will send through MDJA, we'll send you an updated report that will include this. The remarks I have today do not depend on the results of that information, but since it's been in every previous report, for completeness, we want to have it included. We have in this report focused on 3 anchors. One, 190, 117, $190,117 is the salary paid to trial court judges in Minnesota. It's unchanged since July of 2024. I remind that this council recommended increases in 2026 for fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27 of 6%. Those were left unacted by the legislature. I would point you have a 3-page handout, and my goal is that I talk to the handout, not to the full paper, so that you don't have to flip too many pages. Turn to page 3, and in that you'll see a graph there. And I want to point you specifically to the gray area, and that's underneath the period between 2008 and 2012, when district judge salaries remained flat. As some of you are aware, I'm a former state legislator. I was in the legislature at that time. And I remember these conversations. In the first 2 years of that, we were in the middle of the great financial crisis. We received funds from the federal government, from ARRA, to come in there. And then that money went away in 2011, and we had to figure out how to balance the budget. We had quite a time, I'll leave it at that, in 2011 with the balancing of the budget. People in the room who will remember that experience. And within that period, if you look at that graph, you will see that if you look at the top line, which is salaries adjusted for inflation, that number falls by 12% over the 4-year period. So when you hold salaries flat and inflation is occurring, you're eroding the purchasing power of the salaries of the people who receive it. The current decline is following that same structure. You can see that we pointed out on here 2 additional peaks, one in 2020, just as we entered the pandemic period. Another one where adjustments were made in 2024, in 23 and 24 with pay raises of 8%, 4% in nominal terms. But by leaving rates unchanged over the last 2 years, we are now down over 8% from the previous peak. So with that, I then want to turn to looking at the other items on page 1. On the front page, the text part, and I'll just review these briefly because what I have to say is also captured in the text. If you look at the caseload data, that we receive from the Quality Fort Workplace Survey results, You have 43% of 43% of judges saying that the workload is manageable. It's the lowest number they've had in the time that I can observe in this report. We are seeing higher caseloads in many areas, even though in some areas there's been clearance. In some areas, there's been clearance at higher levels. Overall, in terms of what we're seeing from responses of judges in 11 of 17 measurements, you saw declining quality measures from their own survey. Second of all, looking at retention rates. There were in the last 2 years, last cycle, we saw, we brought to you information specifically about retention rates and desire of judges to retire early. One of my students was with me here last time, presented to you information regarding why were judges retiring before age 65. And for some of them, not for all of them, they continued work after leaving their judgeship because it was in one way or another more attractive to them. It's reasonable to think that financial considerations played a role in that. And in some of the surveys, and in this case, my former student actually did talk to several of the judges. In some cases, finances played a significant role. In some places, it didn't play a role. Okay, so it doesn't work every time, but it works sometimes as well. We are now up to 8, retirements before age 65. Okay, as someone who is, I guess I'll just leave it at generally in that area of age myself, I would point out that those of us in our 60s still know a few things and maybe have enough experience to produce good decisions. A judge with experience is a judge that you should value. And it should be the case that when we see more retirements happening for what would be a normal number of 65 or 66, that's an area where you might wonder what's going on. The point here is, and this is in the full report, that was 8 in the last 2 years. That is 20% of all the retirements over that period. It's double the rate of the previous 6 years. 61% of sitting judges, there's a finding in here that 61% of judges have actually moved up their date of retirement as once going into office, meaning when they started in their judgeship, they thought they would retire a certain age and they stepped away sooner. That is in there, and they're getting offers. 85% of those who responded to us indicated that they had received offers to leave. Many of them don't. In fact, it would seem, based on the data we have, the majority of them don't take that offer, but some do. Lastly, it has been the feature of these reports since they started some years ago that we make reference to what's happening in the labor market. I believe that is part of your charge, is to consider the labor market in which you hire judges. In the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for May 2025, just released in the last 5 weeks, the upper quartile of lawyers in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Bloomington MSA earned at least $219,710 annually. We look at the data from Robert Half, and we look at in-house counsels with 10 or more years of experience. They make just under $200,000 a year. That's the median. You're looking for people who probably are at the top, near the top of their profession as they are right now. You're looking for people with experience. So we provide you the data so that you think about where is the range of legal professionals who we want to pull judges from. And if you look at that level, I think you have to conclude that there is that the salary as it stands right now is not competitive with that. Add to that this one fact. As I indicated, and I mentioned this for a reason, we've had previous universities have done this work. one of them, from St. Catherine's, had done a study in which they were able to show that the premium received by a judge when they stepped out of their private practice, they received a paid premium of approximately 13%. That study was done in 2020. There is no longer a 13% premium. It's gone. Okay, you will not receive, okay, for most of those going into the profession, going into a judgeship, they will receive pretty much the same level of pay that they had before. Add to that concerns about workload, concerns that we've discussed. When I was here last time, we discussed issues regarding safety. Add those to that, and you come to the conclusion that there has been a degradation of their standing versus where they were 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. With that, and I want to make sure that Judge Kyle has time to has the amount of time he needs to speak. Let me turn you to the second page now of the handout. This has basically 4 standards. I want you to pick up on 2 things. My job is not to choose which standard you're going to use in terms of setting salaries here. My goal is to show you, regardless of the standard that you choose, under 4 reasonable sets of standards, you arrive at numbers that are only 4% apart. Okay? I don't see much point in me trying to argue you should pick standard 2 versus 4 or 3. Okay? Standard 1, though, I'm going to point to specifically because it was the standard that you had set. Had the legislature chosen to act affirmatively on your recommendation, that number that is there for under the column 7.126 is the number they would have received as of the beginning of next month. Okay. We only add to that assumptions of inflation from that point of about 2.6%. That was in the April Wall Street Journal survey of professional forecasters. That was the average number over this period over which you would be paying folks. Our belief was you had the right number. Okay, at least my belief was you had the right number. I wish they had taken that number. And so I want to reiterate it to you and say, I think that would have been a good choice okay? And we'd be having a very different conversation had they chosen to follow your recommendation. If you'd chosen different standards of trying to meet the purchasing power level that was there in fiscal 24 when the last raise was given, or if you'd chosen to go back to the peak level in terms of real purchasing power, which is the FY20 number, they're not different by very much at all. And if you chose to have if you chose to restore that 13% gap, okay, to over the Twin Cities private sector level, you would have gotten to a number that's slightly higher, but not by too much. Let me last turn to an economic rationale. The report includes something that no report before has included. I've actually chosen with Benedict, I've chosen to include some comment on structural reform. But it draws from the picture. I'll take you back to the graph I started with. Okay, if you look at the picture, under the current statute, as I understand, that governs the work that happens here and the recommendations that you give, inaction by the legislatures costs us. It's automatic, right? Enactment requires an affirmative appropriation from you. That's an asymmetry that in our argument is creating a structural bias toward non-enactment, independent of any legislature's intention or fiscal condition. Minnesota's own salary history documents this twice. Minnesota entered the 2008 freeze ranked 28th in the nation nationally for judicial pay. Okay, 4 years of no increases pushes that out down to 31st in that area. Subsequent to that, and with the work of the legislature and the work of this council, increases, restored real purchasing power, but it never actually restored the national position. Okay, through 2016. It was only in those last few years where you actually move that position. You'll see a table in the full report that indicates that your position rose into the top 20 just before the 2020 was arrived at. You've now moved back somewhat, but only to 22nd. You're not as bad as where you were. Judicial pay is not as far back as it was before. But my suggestion is this. In the way what we need to look at is how can we change the incentives? How can we change the structure in such a way that recommendations of this council are going to be taken in the same way that you take them for your constitutional officers? Where rather than having to have an affirmative action, it's a prescription, as the law means. Okay, and again, I hesitate to argue. I'm in a room full of lawyers and I'm an economist. But I will say, as I read the statute, I'm struck by the difference in the language between prescription and recommendation. And particularly in your last cycle, when you're able to rectify what was perceived as low ranking of salaries for a couple of your constitutional offices. Those did not require an affirmative action from the legislature. And with that, I think I want to hand this off to Judge Kyle to explore that idea further.
And just to note, in your document preliminary draft in 2026 on page 9, you see some of the discussion that we just heard about a structured benchmark approach to judicial salaries. I think it would be profitable for us to have a discussion on that at a later time. I'm going to hold questions until after we've heard from the judge, and then we can bring either of you back up.
I'll stand by, Judge. I'm going to go.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to be presenting on behalf of the Minnesota District Judges Association. I don't have much of a PowerPoint on a few slides, and hopefully I won't mix them up too much. First, I'll give an overview of the Minnesota District Judges Association. Then I'm going to get some highlights about Dr. Banyan's report and also some highlights about his graduate speakers report, and then offer you some recommendations from Minnesota District Judges Association. So what is MDJA? Minnesota District Judges Association is a great organization representing the professional interests of our members, which consist of nearly 400 judges across the state of Minnesota. With almost every district court judge, appellate court judge, senior judges, and retired judges. I'm a judge currently in the 2nd Judicial District, that's Ramsey County. I've been a judge for almost 11 years. And I am currently the president of the Minnesota District Judges Association. We are very pleased to see that your recommendations to the legislature are now in September rather than in April. That timeline was born out of a desire to embrace your thoughtful deliberations and recommendations and make them as meaningful as possible. So that was a good fix at the legislature a couple of years ago. MDJA is especially thankful for Dr. Banyan for his leadership and strong economic background. He thinks deep into the issues that are valuable to both the Compensation Council and my association. It addresses areas of great concern for the state in recruiting and retaining the best and the brightest judges. We also appreciate Dr. Banyan's continuing efforts to enlist talented students like Benedict Mika to assist over the years. And that's been very helpful. You have her survey of an interview of lawyers across the state involving barriers, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Now, some highlights, but first of all, just a preamble. District Court judges in Minnesota were the seventh highest paid of any state of the nation back in 1977. Number 7. Almost 5 decades later, right now we've made it to the low 20s or mid 20s. We have then been back as 30s, as Dr. Banyan mentioned. This depreciation comes in income. This depreciation in income comes despite Minnesota consistently ranking as one of the best states for delivering justice across the country. Currently, the Minnesota judicial salaries simply do not reflect the value of the judges, nor the justice that they deliver. And this should be a priority of the state, not just for judges seeking salary increases. This is a priority, it should be for the state of Minnesota. Dr. Banyan then mentioned his report provides several options to remedy this problem and restore judicial salaries. First, he recommends that the salary increases for FY 27 and 28 under 4 standards. Starting with restoring the council's unacted recommendations for 6% increases in 25 and 26. The salary recommendations are supported by a comprehensive analysis based on hard data. Second, he recommends a change to the compensation council statute so that the council recommendations for judicial pay are prescriptive and treated by the legislature in the same manner as recommendations for constitutional officers are. Other states have pursued this avenue with great success. So why have Minnesota judges lost so much ground over the last just 2 years, well, the last couple of decades, especially the last 2 years, since we were last conferring? I'm going to highlight a couple of Dr. Banyan's items from Dr. Banyan's report and his community survey. One is inflation, close to an 18% increase in the last 2 years. 2, a lack of raises provided by the legislature. Don't have to repeat. Made the recommendation to the legislature 2 years ago, and it wasn't accepted. Labor market comparisons that are in Dr. Banyan's report show that the upper quartile of employers in the metro earn at least $220,000 annually, almost 60% above what a current district court judge. Higher also for in-house counsel. Your associates at my former law firm, Fredericks and Byron, I think make more than I do by a good amount. They're good lawyers, but they got 1 year of experience. 3 more judges are retiring before they reach the mandatory retirement age. 8 district court judges retired before the age of 65 in the last 2 years. We've always had judges retiring before the mandatory 70, but now we're seeing judges retire before 65. 2024, our association survey found that 24% of city judges were actively exploring deployment outside the judicial branch. 85% of those positions offered by recruiters pay significantly more than the judicial salary. 4, we see challenges in judicial applications. Ms. Kamika's survey of Minnesota lawyers found that many potential applicants found the application process burdensome, lacking in transparency and perception of politics. And 5, the caseload and working conditions. Clearance rates, this has real world implications. When you have judges that are overworked and caseloads are not being handled properly, our clearance rates reduce. We try to clear all cases within 1 year. That's just general standard, civil, criminal, whatever. That has gone in number of categories. We're now below 1%. 70% of major criminal cases do not get resolved in 1 year. Those are major civil, serious felony cases. But you'll see it in divorces. I'm in the family court right now in Ramsey County. I can't tell you how many times I'll say, well, get you your trial date in 18 months. And the parties, there, maybe represent themselves, maybe with their lawyers, and put their heads down. They can't believe it. Confused. Where they say, I've been on this for 3 years now. When am I finally get my trial? These are the real world implications. So it's commercial disputes, it's criminal, there's been a slide. Things are just taking longer to get to resolution, and that is not good for me. Dr. Banyan's recommendations relate both to making up for this lost buying power and policy changes, as he mentioned, and I'll talk about that just briefly. Mr. Mika's report, is very interesting also. And it is entitled Understanding Barriers to Judicial Application Process. She found that there were concerns about judicial caseload. We talked about that. It's not the same job it was 10 years ago. More administrative work, less flexibility, and in some but not all cases, clearance rates are falling short. She also mentioned the application process and of course, salary differential. These are things that are real to all lawyers. But one thing we discovered was it wasn't simply just salary, although we're here asking for and requesting criticism. Salary is important, but the amount of work is also just also important for lawyers in Greater Minnesota. Salary inflects more on the metro area than it is in Greater Minnesota. But other areas such as the caseload, the application process. And to the caseload, I should tell you something. I was just speaking over, I believe our judicial counselor, GA President, I'm on that council. This is the Chief Justice's council, all the chief judges in the state, Court of Appeals, his policy setting. They are right now talking about getting the results of a weighted case study that's been conducted. And that study, although it's not finalized, shows that we have 270 judges right now, a little over 300 full time. And it's going to recommend the findings are going to show that we are 40 judges short in this state. We are 40 judges short of what we really need to make sure that we can even make up tax policy. Not going to get 40 judges in the next year. That is something that's going to be a part of our asking the legislature. Part of the debate is to be how far we go. Because in the last 20 years, we've only had 5 new judges in the state. 5 in the last 10 years. No increases 10 years before that. So 5 in 20 years, but we're 40 now. That's what the numbers show. That's not good. So one of her recommendations, interesting, is to keep the survey going, expand it. We made it primarily about the coming years, metro versus non-metro. Continue to survey the lawyers to find out why they're not getting the applications or years. For today, at Judicial Council in Hennepin County, half the business in the state happens in that, down 50%. 3 or 4 openings, they got like 20 or 30 applicants. It's usually over 100. That's in Hennepin. You go out to Cottonwood, down to Houston or Greater Minnesota, there are times when there's 1 applicant or 2 applicants or not. That is a problem. And part of it is money, a large part of it is money. Of course, workload, security issues. So I'm going to talk now about our recommendation, district judge's recommendation. And we call it 6 and 6 plus a fix. Good. 6 plus a fix. MJA affirms our support for pay raises of 6% fiscal 27 and another 6% in 28. This recommendation mirrors the Compensation Council's recommended salary increases 2 years ago. MBJ's recommendation, 6% increases in these 2 years. He's more conservative than the standards proposed by Dr. Banyan. That's okay. It's not surprising. Dr. Banyan is an independent that makes his own independent assessment of our judicial salaries, and that's what we've got. That's what we've got. Honest assessment, full of backed by statistics. However, we're aware of the mindful realities that chose to mirror our recommendation from those made 2 years ago, notwithstanding the persuasive case for higher salaries that have been recommended by Dr. Banyan. Just requesting a salary increases of 6 to 6% is not enough. The problem is in our current system, and this is laid out in Dr. Banyan's report. The problem in our current system is by the way judicial salaries are set. The Compensation Council right now makes advisory recommendations by statute for a final determination by the legislature. And that process is failing Minnesota judges. Year after year, the council has bipartisan recommendations that may increase judicial salaries in the amounts that consistently dwarf what is ultimately adopted by our legislature. A fix is needed. In this report, Dr. Banyan has identified a possible fix, a targeted amendment to the Compensation Council statute. Or like statute numbers 15A.082, Division 3A, that would extend judicial salaries to judicial salaries, the same default already governing constitutional officers. Under his proposed amendment, council's recommendation would take effect unless legislature affirmatively modifies or rejects. In other words, the council's recommendation would be prescriptive. There are other potential fixes, of course, such as seeking a constitutional amendment or tying state court judges' salaries to percentage of a federal district court judge's salary. That's been done in some states. MDGA is interested in a long-term fix. We recently formed a special committee to review long-term fixes. And our Pensions and Benefit Committee and our board last Friday unanimously supported investigating the concept, seeking a perspective of a legislative amendment. But we also want to make sure we're doing our due diligence before we settle on any support. You think, hence, at the end of the day, 6 and 6 plus a fix. I would encourage the Compensation Council to follow Dr. Banyan's lead and recommend recommendations. Salary increases also be fixed to the legislature along with salary. Thank you. In conclusion, MDGA values your work. We appreciate your chance to share our economist report and our judges' experience, and we hope to continue this meeting. Progress. Maybe questions we have to take with them. Dr. Banyan would like to come up here, perhaps. I'm guessing you may have a question or two for him.
Dr. Banyan, are you at the table? And people who have questions should specify which of our two testifiers you specifically want to answer. I'm going to start with Jim, but then we're going to throw it open to the room.
I just want to briefly thank you, Dr. Clavin and MDGA. They were instrumental back in 23 in our ad hoc report in recommending the 2-year process. That was basically where it came from. So I think, given how the budgeting works, your preliminary budget goes in October 15th. This is what makes sense. You look at what we recommend and then you set your budget accordingly. I just have a concern about the fix, and that is that in Article 6, Section 5, if you want to get exact, I think the Minnesota Constitution is pretty clear that the legislature sets the salaries and can't ever reduce your salary. It's in language. In fact, the initial legislation that was proposed in 23 did have what you're talking about, but got reviewed. I wish James was here to comment on it. But I just think it's a challenge. You might have to find a different workaround. Thank you.
Amanda, you're up next.
I find it really interesting, the statistic about being 40 judges short after we attach weighting for caseloads. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit as to how that impacts our judicial system, and then also how you see increases in salaries, helping bridge that or addressing that.
I think we need both. It's a combination. As to the 40, with the question, how did we get there, or how is it impact?
How is it impacting?
Right. So if you're 40 down, we have 10 judicial districts. So maybe average 4, probably 8 in Hennepin, we have some other districts, but you're talking between being short 1 day, the judges each district, maybe 1 each district. That has an effect. That's work. 5 full-time judges work that needs to be spread around other judges. bad results in, and we keep very close to the call. You know, we have the administrators watching what we do, keeping statistics. We have goals every year for criminal, for civil, commercial disputes, family, you name it. And we get results. And you don't want to be in the red, you don't want to be in yellow, you want to be green. You want to have, and when you're down a judge or 2 or 3 or 4 in a district, it's a real strain keeping up those homes. And we see this, I was giving the example from family court. What it takes to get, and we've got people serious felonies that 70% of them aren't getting done in a year. Someone's either sitting in jail or he or she's out in the street, not getting their trial. Victims are waiting. It's not going to work for any. The additional salary increases, you might say, well, that conflicts with asking for more judges because each judicial, it's about 1.5 million for each judge. So it's not just the cost involved in that. And we'll have to be balancing. They ask for judgeships and they ask for salary increases. You're not going to ask for 40 this year. It's going to have to be a whole lot. It took us a long time to get to this point. It'll take us a long time to get back. But you just have to start asking for what we really need. And I think we are getting close. I was in the Judicial Council today and I heard repeatedly from most judges, we are, if not in a crisis, close to a crisis. And we need to talk to the people out in our communities. How quickly is your commercial district? You were in Ms. Mills, I've known him out for a while. Ms. Mills, you were in a commercial, right? Business. Want to get a civil trial. Good luck, right? And I'm sure others, Boyd, Sue Holden, saw you in trial a year ago in Ramsey County, but I'm guessing that personal injury case took a while for you to get there, but you finally had a jury.
Yeah, it's double the standard, it's up to 2 years. It's not one, it's a more complex case.
That's not good. Sometimes people just give up, settle just for, without pursuing the rights that they need. So this is what it's slow. It's happened over many years. It didn't happen overnight. Fix won't happen overnight. But other states have done this. There are 7 or 8 other states that have pursued these types of fixes different ways, prescriptive and there was a challenge actually in New York, and the New York highest court. So precedent would be a hard ask. It would be a challenging process, but it is one where, and we have made any decisions. Dr. Van, he swears he has not been communicating with my staff, but we haven't been talking to him or said, you need this. This was on your own, not in any of your earlier reports and wasn't on any reports from our earlier economists. But we had thought about this and then it has got us thinking more seriously.
So is the thought that increasing the judicial salaries will both compensate judges that are overworked with larger caseloads now and then possibly attract?
Just because you're down 40, you need to attract people, right? And so if you don't have a salary increase that's commensurate, then it's going to be hard to fill those positions with the best of the grades.
If I might add, just because you decided to hire 40 more folks doesn't mean you're going to get additional applications for those 40. We already have an applicant level that seems to be rather thin, where periodically you're having to reopen an application period because you didn't get enough. 40 will mean you're gonna have to work harder to get those positions.
Before I ask my question, I'll also respond to the point that Judge Kyle just made about, there is a cost to adding judgeships, so there's a cost to increasing salaries. We'll hear this in July when we hear from the judicial branch, but an entire branch of government is a fraction of our state budget. We get pretty good value for money on our an entire judicial branch being, I don't want to say what, it's single digit percentage. I forget what exactly it is, but it's excellent value for money. I'm going to put my constitutional law hat on. I'm a professor of state constitutional law at the University of Minnesota. And just to respond to something Jim mentioned about Article 6, Section 5, which is the compensation of judges shall be prescribed by the legislature. And there was some disagreement at the time the bill was 2023. There's also disagreement about whether that language means that the legislature must set the salary, or whether the legislature can pass a law delegating that authority to another entity and have the ability to override if necessary. I certainly was one of those folks who was saying that it was constitutional, and I think there is disagreement. I don't think there's consensus of whether that change, possible change, would violate Article 6, Section 5. So I just wanted to mention it.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Banyan. In the study, the central finding is that salary is not the primary nor most universal barrier to judicial applications. Is that, what other barriers exist? And is it, when you're thinking about recruiting, especially recruiting 40 new judges, how are there thinking or thoughts about another policy approach to how to encourage people to apply if it's not just salary?
Well, there's a couple of things that you could do. You could imagine, I don't think there's anything that says to prevent you from saying, I need a different salary in greater Minnesota than I do in the Twin Cities, because clearly the cost of living is different between those places. Okay, so if you set one salary for the entire state, in Twin Cities, that would be a bigger barrier than it will be in greater Minnesota. And that is in fact borne out by Ms. Kimika's survey, where she finds it is a barrier even when you're thinking of applying. It's a barrier if you're in the Twin Cities, if you're applying for a judgeship, say in the second or the fourth. But if you're applying in greater Minnesota, it seems the issue there is more about workload and somewhat the cultural aspects of something that came through in her study was something to the effect of, who are my colleagues? Who will I be talking to? How will I have the communication I want to have socially, professionally, right? Who am I working with? So you have to say, in any job, be it judgeships, professors, or anything else, there's a variety of things that attracts you to a job. Money is only one thing. But there is a significant difference in its impact on judgeships within the Twin Cities area than in greater Minnesota. And I just want to be sure I'm clear that we do see that being an issue, particularly within the Twin Cities. We don't see it as big an issue outside of the Twin Cities, but there are other issues that are there that frankly may be more of handling the workload issues that MDJA is just giving you in their discussion.
I did have a question, and this, you may not know the answer, they may not, or we can talk about it separately, but have we got any feedback as to why the compensation council recommendations haven't been accepted in the past? I'm just curious, I'm just curious that this is, I started, my first one was on 2021. So this is year 5 for me being on this council. And I think we have this conversation every time. And so I'm just curious if we ever get that feedback, if we could seek that feedback to see if we could proactively try to work around it. So I'm just curious if we've gotten any of that at all.
No. I think the reason is it's called an omnibus bill that our budget goes to, and in an omnibus bill, we are up against compete with other very important groups that need money. Public defenders, I think I said earlier, civil litigation, legal aid. And at the end of the week, at the end of the session, a lot of times decisions are made, right? And we are lost in the shuffle. Last year, Dr. Manning's report mentioned this. We came here after 6 and 6. Council recommended the legislature, and we're lobbyists. We're talking to legislators. We're hearing, well, 6 and 6 isn't going to do it, but we might be able to do 2, maybe 3, maybe 1 to 3, and then in the last day, final hours, the decisions are made, and we get some down. Now, fortunately, our staff got a little bit, there was something there for our staff, but the judges figured out. And I think it's just end of session, and you know how the sausage making goes, Doctor, you've been there before, but it's just the reality. I'm not sure it's personal, it's just the reality of the process.
Thank you, Judge. And I think my memory is that this recommendation is part of why you're meeting on this now, rather than last time we came to you, I remember it being cold outside, so I'm gonna guess it was February or March. I don't remember dates, I remember temperature. But it was, I remember it being relatively cold out, and I don't know that I believe the council's recommendation was dated in March. If I recall correctly. Okay, you're already in the middle of session. You are already 3 weeks after the February budget forecast, which kind of is the moment when the green flag drops and everybody races to the end of session. And so in short, your thing is your recommendation is arriving in the middle of lots of other things when people maybe already have their minds made up about certain stuff. So maybe this is fixed by the thing you've done now, and maybe that gets better that way. But it'd be worth going back and let's do it. And yes, there's a footnote in the full report to the session daily report on what happened in the last hour. And I would encourage you to look at it to sort of see. There was an attempt to put at least some small increase, some number well below 6 and 6 in the last at the end of session, and it was dropped. I was late is probably about as close as accurate as I can be.
I'm Devin and then Jim.
Amanda, I'd also say, though the branch is good value for money, the branch often doesn't get what it asks for, not just the judicial salaries. Last year, there was a significant push to increase juror pay. Juror pay is horrific right now. It was I would say the #1 effort of the judicial branch to raise that pay didn't happen. Seemed like it was going to for a long time and then didn't. Many of the asks the branch had last year weren't included in the final omnibus. And in fact, the Chief Justice testified on the second to last or the last day, which almost never happens, called out that issue and noted that in fact, some things had happened where they were going to raise filing fees and then give that money not to the judicial branch. That's how much the judicial branch was not getting what it needed to get last year. That ended up being taken out afterwards. But I think this unfortunately is endemic also of the fact that it's not the branch is not as big a player as you might expect it to be in the budget negotiations.
This is primarily Dr. Mannion, because you're a former legislator. Just, you may be aware of this already, but we added 8 legislative representatives for this 2-year period. These folks are obviously new to the process. I would have to imagine that we didn't get much feedback from what I would assume would be senior legislative staff or caucuses. And so when we got the usual very thorough presentation from MDJ and Jeff Short, we just naturally felt that was a good argument. It was really well presented, and this is another very good presentation. But the reality is that we're going to have a $3 million structural deficit to deal with next year, and there's just going to be belt tightening unlike we've seen since the early 1980s. Those of us who actually kind of were there in the early 1980s, you know about it. It's really rough. So if nothing else, would you say that the legislative representatives should hear from staff this summer? Leading question.
Sure. The short answer is sure, yes. They should, in fact, hear from them. I want to be clear about, and I'm trying to think, because you're right, I used to wear a different hat at one time. I would say I like the hat I wear now much better. But the role of I think of this council is to recommend compensation sufficient to attract and retain qualified candidates. That's what you're representing to them. It's the legislature's job to put on my other less desirable hat to say, yeah, that sounds really good, but with all the other competing needs of the state, we can't do that right now, okay? I would say let the legislature do the job it's asked to do, that it's allowed to do because it carries election certificates, and then let this council do what it's designed to do, which is to say, here's what we should pay if we want to attract qualified candidates. And you can have staff move between those places. There are people that do this regularly. Move between the legislature and this council to sort of say, here's why they were saying what they were saying. Nobody, after I left this meeting in early 2025, nobody from the legislature asked me, what was there? Can you explain something in the report? Nothing like that happened. Okay, I didn't really expect it. Okay, but it's important to note that somebody should be sharing the good thinking that this council has with them, and maybe that is something that is a staff function. Because the one thing I learned when I was in the legislature was the staff, particularly the nonpartisan staff, are all professionals, and all of the knowledge of what the legislature as an institution has, it's there. You can rely on it communicating professionally.
Some of the folks who may be online, other questions? Harry, go ahead. Harry.
I'm sorry. Thank you for these presentations, but it seems like we as members have our responsibility to communicate with our state senators and representatives with this information as well. And I think maybe as we go forward, that's part of what this commission does, is to be able to bring some of those messages to our state legislators, just as an idea of how to move this forward more before the legislative session or during the legislative session. Thank you.
Question for Judge Kyle, getting back to Ms. Mills' point earlier about the weighted caseload study showing that we are 40 district court judges short. That seems a big number from what it was only, 2 or 4 years ago. But nearly double what it has been. And it seems like a big hole to fill. I know that retired judges serve a non-retired capacity to help backfill and cover some of the cases in all the districts. Is that a useful tool, and what impact does that have on budget overall of the court system when it's ad hoc?
Yeah, we have senior judges. So once you retire, you just retire, or you can take what's called senior status, senior judge, in which you become in court cases. In all districts, we senior judges, we have quite a few senior judges because of the record number of retirements over the last 10 years. So there are literally senior judges out there ready to work, wanting to work. Our budgets though limit them. And I can tell you many times, every time I bump into a senior judge from Ramsey County, then say, why can't you guys give us some more work? Isn't there more work for us? Well, we've already gone through our senior budget, senior judge budget. Okay. So it's a budget number, it's a budget, it's a shoot as much as we can. But it's not enough money, and plenty enough. There are enough senior judges, but there's not enough to even be paying them, and they don't get paid $300-$400 for a day session.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. We'll strongly consider your recommendations at our upcoming meetings. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Nick, you are going to provide data and then other questions on that. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, members, included in your packets and posted online, is some data that I have collected. Of course, if you have other data requests, feel free to let me know. So the first document, I believe, is sort of a survey of county attorney, assistant county attorney, public defender salaries. And then also some sort of average of private sector attorney salaries. Obviously, there are positions above and below those. There's sort of a broad array, including both metro and rural greater Minnesota positions. And then for the public defenders, those got a large increase in 2023, and those have also been held flat since then. The next are some giant spreadsheets. I collected the judicial salaries going back to the beginning of statehood, which was kind of a fun project. And so you can look at all the way back to 1857, the salary. Of course, appellate judges were not created in Minnesota until 1983. And I think interesting to note is that in some of those early years, salary for judges, district court judges was based on where in the state they were. So if you look in the early 1900s, they are set where they get bonuses based on what county, how many counties they cover and the population of those counties. So if the council wanted to do a more complex scheme, there is historical precedent for that. And then the next large spreadsheet, this one only goes back to, I only did it back to 1971, but I did a comparison of adjusting for inflation, judicial salaries and how they've sort of matched up in 2025 dollars. So on the left is their current salary, middle is the rate, and on the right is their salaries adjusted for inflation. I am not an economist, so if anyone finds an issue with this data, please let me know, and I'm happy to correct it. But that was just one non-math guy's attempt to do a little math. And lastly, the National Court Association, the National Center for State Courts, has a survey of judicial salaries, and that this is as of January 1st of this year. So a little outdated, but it has Minnesota's comparisons to other states. And then on the back is more salary details. Oh, and lastly, I think is information I got from the judicial branch. This includes judicial turnover data that we received last year. It's an update to that. And then update to why judges were retiring. That is all the data I've collected so far. Happy to answer any questions, and of course, happy to collect other data that folks think is important.
Questions? Jim?
I'll just mention, and I do really appreciate the salary adjustment, and Nick and I had a little back and forth this morning on this. Keep in mind that especially among high compensated or advanced degree people, if you look historically, and there's plenty of data out there, I didn't pull the best references out, but the Economic Policy Institute has a lot of data. An eight-year-old article, but basically those folks are about 30% up since higher than the inflation rate. If you're looking at from 1979 to to 2017. This publication is from 18. But they're 30.9% higher. And even just regular folks who do not, they also outpace the inflation rate. So just keep it in mind. I still think this is very valuable because you can see where judges were losing ground or gaining a bit. But it's not a realistic look at how people are compensated, because they're compensated higher than they were in the 70s and the 80s, because we are a wealthier society, and particularly wealthy people or high income people are better compensated.
I just have a question about this. Last document. Where did you say, where did these numbers come from?
This came from the judicial.
And do you know how did they do a survey or they asked judges like an exit interview or something?
Yeah, I believe it was.
And then, would it be possible for future meetings to have something that shows the number of applicants for a judicial vacancy for the last couple of years? And if it can be specific to show like
By district.
by district.
Yeah, because it's gonna vary wildly.
And I've also reached out to the Judicial Selection Commission, and I'm hoping they'll be able to testify. So hopefully I can get this data and they can talk about that.
That's great, thanks.
Looking to testify, reference for more than one applicant. And one is important, virtual cake and political were mentioned, and that would be my experience, just mentioned is all. Down there in terms of recruiting, potential candidates, to make this process more applicant. So other questions, Nick? Briefly, we have two more meetings of council, July 16th and August 20. And offline, David and I were talking about potentially coming with recommendations for the July meeting as opposed to the August meeting. And putting them in people's packets and outline them. What we have to do are make judicial recommendations. And what we have to do is establish the salary for the Office of Inspector General so that they can go forward with their hiring. And then what we would like to do is work with the MMB to create richer data streams going forward for the 2027-2028 Compensation Council. And I think at least consider the ideas put before us today about recommendations to change the judicial salary process going forward. And those are things we have to do, but the things we could decide if we wanted to do that. So I'll turn to David about how he thinks that the July meeting should run.
Thanks for the share. I had just suggested if we, looking at the OIG recommendation, it seems like we could do that in July, based on what we have today and what we'll get for that meeting. Could also do judicial salary recommendations in July, and then use the August meeting to talk about what other information we think the next year's compensation council should start with, so there we can get the staff folks working on that piece. I hadn't considered when we would do the legislative structural recommendations. Maybe that could be in August as well, but I would favor just doing the work that we have to get done in July. I think we've done it before. It seems pretty straightforward based on what I've seen today. So that might be it.
And how that would proceed would be, in the past, we've had like a chair's recommendation, which we work with each other and staff, and that sure we could add into that an option to delay. So you can, instead of reporting or amending, could also suggest a date in August if it felt we weren't ready. So that's something that David and I may talk about all offline, and we may bring to the July meeting And in terms of the others, we're gonna make a recommendation, we wanna vote on, we want a quorum. We're gonna talk about future data needs, we know the quorum for that. Sessions. So, comments, Amanda?
No, that was actually one of the points I was gonna make, because if we don't have consensus if we don't bring our recommendation until August and we don't have consensus, then we don't make a recommendation, or if we do start it in July, we can vote on it, maybe we're good. If not, we would still have that August meeting to potentially tweak it and make new votes. I'd also say, like, judging on what we've decided, we maybe need to be a little bit more strategic about how we present our recommendation, if that's what we're doing. And so we can maybe talk about that in August as well too, if we need to show up. And so I am very supportive of like trying to move forward with a recommendation at our next meeting. So then we have August as the, as the additional time. Because we've definitely come up to it where we're in that last meeting, we're not getting anywhere and like that.
Well, I understand the concern and possibly I'm missing that there's a concern about whether we're going to have a quorum, but I don't know if that's it. What I'm worried about is, I'm not a lawyer. I'm one of the few who aren't around here. But I'm concerned that the statute says, you're done when you're done with making your salary recommendations. So I would think the pending, we would want to word it in such a way that you would just say, and then we will ratify the final wording of the report in August, or however you want to do it.
Typically, we usually have a motion that gives the chair and vice chair capacity to reword and final.
And I understand that given we've been given the extra month, it might make sense for us to literally just put the stamp of approval on it at that time. But I may be missing that we're concerned about achieving a quorum. Is that the case?
Go ahead.
I would not oppose that in terms of being an aspirational goal. But I, for one anyway, would like to get more information about the OIG, for example. And waiting until July to have a group discussion of some presentations and discussions about that. Seems like that'd be pretty abrupt to make a decision on that. It may be that in the interim between now and July, there may be some workshops available or some kind of presentations that can be available through other means to help inform. Lawyers might be the only one who would like to have more information, would like to get a better sense of the position and what's going to evolve. So I wouldn't say absolutely we shouldn't. Instead, I would say we should plan for the prospect that maybe never be premature based on how the information has come out. The other point, and I don't think this is as critical in my thinking, but I think it's important to the process, is to hear from the judicial branch as well as state that they're interested in the juvenile.
Our presentations from the judicial branch and a lot of factor in everything we say. And as I said earlier, if there's a lack of comfort when we get to July, we will put any decision off into August and seek and find a quorum. Going forward, one of the downsides of being back here this year is primarily that they did not enact our recommendations on judicial salaries. That's the biggest downside, because if the legislature and the governor had adopted our recommendations, there would be no need for this. And maybe going forward, it will be useful both to MMB and to the new governor to have our recommendations in the judicial matters structured in such a way that that can be part of a governor's budget you put these things into the legislature, so often you're creating small baskets, and then within the small basket, all the funding competes against each other. But when the governor gets the governor's budget, judiciary expenditure recommendations can stand against the entire all funds budget. And that gives a lot more leeway for our governor to advocate for the judicial branch. And maybe the legislative process will take notice of that. And so that's the hope. I'm intrigued by the idea of ideas that would change compensation council's authority to set judicial budgets. And I think that the thing that the legislature does very badly is consistency. And any HR person say that once you establish a good salary range, that revisiting that, making modest adjustments and accounting for inflation creates the kind of morale that our organization needs. And that the legislative process is a peaks and valleys, and that's not good HR policy. So there's the conflict. So we're trying to work around these things. Offline, David and I'll talk about what we can and can't get done in July. And we'll communicate that well in advance of July, but we're definitely going to try to get a lot of additional testimony. Nick, can you tell us who's testifying in July?
Right now, we have the judicial branch is testifying, and then I'm working on the Judicial Selection Commission. And if there's more information we'd like from MFB, who's no longer here, I'm positive they'd be happy.
Just to be very clear here, the second year process was necessitated because the judicial branch indicated that the budgeting process needed to happen in this time frame in order for them, because judges take up such a large portion of the judicial branch budget. They need the preliminary budget on October 15th is the deadline. So we're going to be meeting here no matter what, regardless of what was done a year and a half ago. And that's just because this is the way it's needed to be budgeted. Now, whether we do things related to constitutional officers and agency heads, obviously we are in this case because the legislature decided we would do that. But this will always happen this way in the future, simply because it's the correct time to.
Role, I think they would be a routine annual activity. And we're not there yet, but that's the goal for 27-28. All of these things should fit into a more routine cycle. We can help it a bit. But the other, just a note, was that the last legislative and the last political balance state was very tight, very narrow. And just in general, I'm shocked that's how well they did get a lot of things done. But it was, you know, the almost year time in the legislature meant that the ability to do a lot of important big things was at least somewhat attenuated by that tie. And so, you know, every 2 years we get to have an election, and every 2 years something different happens. But I personally think that they did a lot of work in the last legislative session.
I'll just comment, and you know how I feel. You were the one who brokered power sharing arrangement in the House, and everyone should be pretty darn proud of you for having set up a system that worked. Very well. No special sessions over the biennium, so congratulations, Patrick.
I have to say, and I sincerely mean this, Speaker Damon, that's the department. With, you know, group public servants in those meetings. And it's just another staffer sitting in the corner. I was in awe of their ability to get things done. And, I have nothing but respect for saddest thing in the world to have lost the department. But this group is gonna do our work, and we have a lovely meeting in July, and we do have a meeting in August, which will have both of those. And we'll make decisions on right and not fun. And, so if there's more you want, or more people you wanna hear from, please let me know, because guess what? Sometimes those folks don't have to come, even if we slightly invite them. There may be people you might want to hear from, or after the plan. That's the way it is. If you want to gather attention and I really do appreciate everybody being here. The thoughtful questions. Thank you for the job today. Thank you to staff. Staff has done a great job of setting us up to be successful this summer. With that, there is an events report in your. And Susan has a question. Amanda has a question.
I think we have the same, I think we have the
Both
same.
have a question that I've got, just a couple of things in terms of that.
Absolutely.
If we could circulate the lab report of the science, we referred to that a number of times today, it's not at the top of my list. It'd be helpful to have that. And I don't know when the weighted caseload study will be released by the judicial branch, but it would be very good for us to have that as well.
I was just gonna say, I wasn't clear on the constitutional officers. Do we set that for 2 years? So we're good on that right now? Is that?
You are, I work on constitutional officers, and with the exception of the Office of
Which,
Inspector
yeah.
General, we're done with our work on the agency. So it's
Just these two, the judicial and the, okay.
those are the ones that you have to do something on. So.
Just one more thing, Patrick, and I mentioned it to Michelle. But I think if it's possible, if you think it's appropriate, and again, to narrowly address this, with how the new office fits in. Existing structure in DHS. And fraud, healthcare fraud, Medicaid, I should say, fraud. But any recommendation from Tim O'Malley, who did the special study report that came out a couple months ago, he was appointed by the governor, but had been a plenty appointee as CHE. I think it would be interesting to hear from him on OIG, simply not about the fraud, but how, in much the same way as Ms. Leland testified, how he feels it would fit together, where maybe that salary should be.
Yes. And if any of the folks within the Roberto in the Inspector General or anti-fraud wants to testify, we would take that testimony. I'm not sure we're gonna get a lot of takers for that, but we'll put the offers out there for anybody. And by the way, any member of the public who wants to come testify, let Nick know, and we would listen to any member of the public who wanted to come. And with that, coming in, we are adjourned.
I am here to be a responsible adult, but I'm not.
Yeah.
You can take them, and there's a lot of information.
Yes. Yes, remind me of what I talked about, so I was also hoping that, I don't know, just don't know.
Okay, yeah.
But I am the DFL endorsed candidate for the city house, right? So I am running for it.
It's your day, you can't.
I was gonna say, doesn't mean I'll get elected either, right? So.
Yeah, so. We're having some kids now, so. Yeah, it should be fun.
I'm like a constituent, I just wanted to be above, you know.
Thank you.
I am gonna go take some pictures of my cat for my campaign.
The next one?
It is. It is.
Right.
You know, like every day they're like, oh, please, it's like, it's raining, and so I'm like, I'm so glad today was nice.
I know Jeff since I was.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, one of my like best friends in.
Right on. License plate over there. I don't know if that's like regarding speaking from driving to work, but you always going down, but the big ass is the license.
I'll tell, I literally called it on the way over here about something else, but.
Thank you very much.
To see if they are interested, that's what I was asking about the constitutional officers too, but she.
Yeah.
I'll see if that's under her.
Like, Tim made me wake up late, I don't know if you recognize me really.
Yeah.
Feeling good?